Who's Left podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from an unapologetically leftist perspective. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I'm recording from Bloomington. So, the Trump regime returned to power in Washington, just as the Braun Beckwith ticket cruised to victory in Indiana, as did countless religious extremist candidates nationwide, on an avalanche of bigotry and grievance. Immigrants to this country have been perhaps the largest and most visible group to suffer at the hands of the administration, but they are not alone. The Christian nationalist playbook guiding the far right, the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, of which we spoke at length on this program, is unsparing in the vitriol it directs at the LGBTQ community, particularly transgender people. Not unlike certain other right-wing nationalist movements that rose to power in the 20th century, the MAGA movement has found trans folks to be a useful target, developing, honing, and increasing their attacks on this vulnerable community over the last few years. The pace has only quickened since Trump's January inauguration. Earlier, I spoke with Indiana Stonewall Democrats President Veronica Pedrell, the first openly trans elected official in the state. In that discussion, we largely took a high-level view of the political landscape and lamented the fact that some liberals seemed eager to leave the trans community behind for electoral expediency. Now, several months into the Trump and Braun administrations, let's zoom in and look at the ways these hostile regimes have targeted our trans friends and neighbors. Gender-affirming care for trans youth has been severely curtailed since 2021, but this year has seen aggressive rollbacks on trans rights for adults, too. As if it isn't hard enough to exist in this world as a transgender individual, Republicans are now using the full force of the state to make it even harder. My guest today is Lilliana Young, Secretary of the Bloomington Monroe County Human Rights Commission and founder of the Sisterhood of Bloomington, a solidarity and support group for trans women. In the following conversation, we'll talk about the various ways the state and federal governments, under GOP leadership, have actively made life more difficult for the trans community, how municipalities can help protect their vulnerable populations, and why something as simple as an ID card can be so important. Real quick, before we get to the interview, please consider supporting Who's Left with a paid subscription. This is an independent media project. I don't paywall content, and I don't rely on advertising. Only individuals like you keep this thing going. Maybe I could make more money if I did things differently, but I refuse to gatekeep valuable information in the middle of a political crisis. So please, if you find value in this work, go to whosleft.us and subscribe at the paid level. It's only $5 a month or $50 for the whole year to help me write more, research more, and organize more. Not ready for a long-term commitment? You can make a one-time contribution on Cash App or Venmo. Links are in the show notes. Me and my old body would like to spend less time on construction and more time constructing a better future for Indiana, but I need your financial support to do so. And if that doesn't work for your budget at this time, you can still help out by liking and sharing on social media, commenting, leaving reviews, providing feedback, and forwarding the articles to your people. We are building a community of Hoosiers dedicated to making the state and its government work for all of us, not just the elite few. Please join us. Follow on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at Who's Left, and I'm personally at ScottROG78 on Instagram, Threads, Twitter, and Mastodon. Tell the others. Let's build a radically democratic Indiana together. Thanks again. Now, here's my conversation with Lilliana Young. Hey, Lilliana Young. Welcome to the Who's Left podcast. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Very glad to be here.
I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your activism out in the community. So why don't you tell folks who may be joining us today a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I am Lilliana Young, and as just a resident of Bloomington, I have stumbled my way into being one of the city's LGBTQ community leaders. Um, I founded a group called the Sisterhood. It's a non-registered organization of trans women. It's been involved in mutual aid and city policy and state level activism as well. Uh, as an example, back in 2024, our group was responsible for the drafting and passing of City Resolution 2024-14, which was a trans youth healthcare resolution that the city's
Hmm.
adopted. And uh, in my capacity working with the city, I serve as the secretary of the Bloomington Monroe County Human Rights Commission. Though I am required to specify I do not represent the city in this interview.
Yes.
Just so anybody from the city watching this understands, I'm not representing the city here.
Okay. Very good. Fair enough. Yeah. Thanks for making that clarification. Sometimes those political organizations get sketchy when somebody is speaking for themselves as a representative of a certain group. So um, let's talk about why you are here today. Um, so I mean, look, not like it's not already hard enough to exist in this world as a trans person, but the state of Indiana has sought to make it harder over the last couple years. Is that an accurate statement?
That's an understatement.
Mm,
um, on a state level, the Indiana Republicans are trying very hard to catch up to Texas and Florida.
yeah,
Um,
not
and
good company to have.
well, I was born and raised in Texas, so I've already seen how bad things can be, and I would really rather that not happen here in Indiana too.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's
So
definitely an accurate statement.
what exactly is it they've been up to? I know this year was a budget year, and there were a bunch of anti-trans legislation, a bunch of bills proposed. I don't think any of them, or at least any of the worst ones, actually got through. But Governor Mike Braun did sign a couple of executive orders, which makes life more difficult for trans Hoosiers.
Let's see. I believe that there was legislation proposed that would amend state law so that trans Hoosiers cannot change their gender markers on their IDs. It did not get passed through. Yeah, I guess we'll circle around to the other
Yeah.
end of that here in a moment. Um, there, there was a bill, yet another version of the bill that says trans girls can't play sports in Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
This time it was for the collegiate level, and
Yes.
I was able to clear my work schedule to be there to speak against that one. And I just want to say for the record that Representative Davis, who wrote that bill, could not answer a single softball question that the Democrats threw at her. And they softballed the absolute heck out of her. And she couldn't answer anything. She just kind of stood there, shrugging and
Yeah.
saying, I don't really know how to answer your questions. So
And
that's
this is Michelle Davis, right? One of the more virulent Christian nationalists in the Indiana state legislature. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so we passed through a legislation from somebody who genuinely can't answer questions about what she wrote. So that's great. But now trans women cannot play sports anywhere in Indiana. Just go sit at home and watch TV, I guess. All three of us in the state who wanted to be athletes anyway.
it is so silly that they would hone in on that when I think I just saw that in the entire NCAA Division One, Two, and Three, uh, thousands and thousands and thousands of athletes compete, and 10, I think 10 across all sports, across all levels,
Mhm.
were transgender athletes, and yet it's an effective cudgel electorally. I want to say like the ad that said Donald Trump is for you and Kamala Harris is for they them. Yeah, yeah. What gross, so gross. And the Democrats weren't out there campaigning on these issues. They didn't really talk about it, but Republicans were effectively able to use your very existence as a cudgel to beat Democrats up, and it it's the oldest trick in the book to divide and conquer, and we've seen in the last 60 years, as we've grown as a society, it's become less culturally acceptable to denigrate this marginalized group and that marginalized group, and n- now bigots have few options left, so they pick on folks like you who are less than 1% of the population, um, hold no real power, and are still in many ways, you know, not quite yet understood by the public at large, and that's why it works, right? Because people are afraid of something new. They're afraid of people they don't understand.
Yeah. Um, Percentage wise, it's hard to quantify because you have trans people and you have non-binary people, and
Hmm.
there's a real heavy overlap. Some of us identify as both, so I'll answer to both. So I will just say roughly maybe 1 to 1.5% of the population, which is still so tiny. In Indiana, out of 7 million people, we are maybe 70,000 of us. And that's maybe, you know, it could be even less. That's just raw percentages. The trans community has kind of had to deal with there's been cycles in the country.
Yeah.
If you actually go back several decades, I think it was like in the late 40s, there
Hmm.
were some news articles at the time talking about like former GI becomes blonde bombshell or something, and you
Yeah.
read the article and it's framing it as like, oh, holy crap, look at this thing we can do with modern medicine. We can turn men into women. Isn't the future amazing? And a few decades later, you get into the like 70s and 80s, especially during
Hmm.
the 80s, huge anti-LGBT backlash during the 80s.
Yeah.
And then, time goes on, you get another wave of acceptance. And then we're back into the 2020s, and trans acceptance takes a nosedive again. And we're back to, you know, these people are weird alien demon things, and we don't know what to make of them. Uh, Honestly, I'm not that different than most people. I have a fiance. She and I want to get married, and we just want to have our little dog and my daughter. And I don't even want to be an activist. I'm just, you know, somebody's got to do something. So I guess it'll be me.
Yeah. Yeah. These times um, press folks into action who maybe never thought about becoming an activist before, but in a lot of ways, Like, you don't have the choice. You have to go out there and, fight for your life. These folks really are endangering you. Unfortunately, there are too many folks, even on, my side of the political aisle, that aren't willing to stand up either. They see defending the marginalized as some sort of liability electorally, right? Like, um, after the election, I remember there was a lot of talk around this. Democrats were too woke, talking about it. Again, they weren't. They weren't even really talking about uh, trans rights at all. Um,
Now, Kamala
and when
Harris,
the Republicans brought it up, they didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, and 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 we've seen that split in the party, where the more, like, establishment figures are very much like, shh, let's not talk about that. We're just going to talk about threats to democracy or whatever. Again, very important topic, but not the only one. And I generally think it's a sign with your elected leaders or wannabe elected leaders and politicians, if they're willing to throw some people overboard. Well, who else are they willing to throw overboard, right? And so really, I think even me, as a straight white man, I want to see how politicians stand up for the people who are being picked on the most, and they're a real one.
and I was about to say a moment ago, Kamala Harris didn't even mention trans people or trans issues one single, not in her entire campaign. She said nothing, not a single thing
Right.
about it. So yeah, the very idea that the Democrats were ever too woke is it's factually false, and it's also just kind of ridiculous in general. Uh, and yeah, and it's unfortunate to align myself with the Democrats, which I always at least used to. Sometimes I have second thoughts these days because yeah, like you said, I think by now I've read maybe 15 different articles that's talking about uh, you know this person or that person behind closed doors, in congressional meetings, saying, yeah, you know what, we might have to step away from defending trans people at all if we want to make any progress anywhere else. And it's like, you don't have to, and I'd prefer you didn't.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I have a lot of friends here in Bloomington that are probably not going to make it the next few years if you do give up on us. So I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't.
As somebody who talks to a lot of politicians and aspiring politicians, how would you like these folks to handle this issue when, say, maybe they're trying to, focus on an economic message? Like, you look in New York right now at Zoran Mamdani, and he's being held up as an example of how to do this. His campaign is entirely focused on wealth concentration, affordability, and stuff like that. Yet he's not throwing folks under the bus. What's the way for candidates to avoid getting painted as some, like, I don't know, raging woke Marxist sexual pervert or something, like Republicans are always going to paint us as? How do we handle that and stay on message without throwing folks overboard? How would you handle that if you were running for office?
Um, so I think I see this. I think it's primarily two things. The first part is things that are different can still coexist with each other
Hmm.
and be equally true. So, in the case of like Zoramandani, Mamdani. I'm too white. I'm sorry. Um,
You do better than some people who are paid for a living to get those names right. So you're doing just fine.
um, he most of his campaigning is, of course, affordability and things like
Yeah.
that. But he has openly stated support for the trans community. He's been to a pride event where he held up not the all encompassing pride flag, but the trans pride flag, which I think is a very specific kind of a message. And if
Mm,
I'm remembering right, he's also promised to make sure that hospitals in New York City are allocating money to trans healthcare. So he's specifically, gone to bat for us, which is, while also being on the message of an affordable city. So you
yes.
can do both at the same
Yeah.
time, and you should do both at the same time. And then the other part of it is uh, Republicans, whatever label you want to call them, MAGA, conservatives, Republicans, they're going to hate us. They're going to smear us no matter what we do. We
Yep.
can't avoid it. It's a fundamental aspect of how they operate politically. So make it mean something. Make it count for something. And in some cases, just plain own it. Yeah, I'm woke as hell.
Yeah.
I believe in Medicare for all and trans rights, and I want homeless people to have house or an apartment that they can live in. I want companies to pay a wage that you don't need 80 hours a week with two incomes just to barely pay your rent. Yeah, I'm woke as hell, uh, and so what? Uh, um,
Yeah.
and too many Democrats, especially older Democrats,
Yeah.
are very afraid of that. And and a lot of them, and this is what confuses me sometimes, that a lot of them did kind of come up in the older eras, like the 60s and 70s, where there were a lot of, civil rights marches, rallies, protests. And I think they've forgotten
Hmm.
that when it comes to these kinds of issues, you you can't compromise. There is no compromise on civil rights. Civil rights is very much an all or nothing thing. Either
Yeah.
a class of people is equal to everyone else, or they're just fundamentally not. And you got to pick whichever one you want, because you can't do both. And you got to be loud. You gotta, like John Lewis said, you gotta make good trouble. And you can't just, you can't bury your head in the sand and hope that things will just get better if you stay quiet, because they won't. And in fact, you're going to let a lot of people down who are relying on you. And you can't just kind of maybe make a few vague gestures and hope that that's enough. No, you gotta shove your way into the spotlight. You gotta grab the mic and you gotta scream into it, and you gotta refuse to yield. That's exactly what you do.
I think a lot of maybe your average Democrat, they they're trying to triangulate, right? They don't want to offend anybody. They don't want to stand for anything because they're afraid it's going to come back to bite them in the ass later. If I was advising candidates and they don't, maybe they don't know how to speak to trans issues, they're generally sympathetic, but they don't know how to talk about it. I- I'm going to say to them, if you want to stay on message, you're talking to a Republican, somebody asks you about trans rights or the LGBTQ community or anything. And I think the proper democratic response is listen, you leave those people alone. They just are trying to live their lives like any other American. You are using this as a talking point, as a distraction. You want to divide from your and focus on this instead of your crappy economic agenda. Is that okay, or do you want to see something more of like a full-throated um, defense of the trans community?
Both, actually.
Yeah,
Uh, you know, and this is in a lot of spaces that I am involved in. I will say one thing that the trans community is very tired of hearing is the phrasing, "It's a distraction." Not
mm,
because it's not true, it is a
right.
distraction, but because in a lot of places when you use the phrase, "It's a distraction," it can inadvertently downplay the severity of things. Yeah, the attack on trans people right now is absolutely a distraction tactic, but it's a distraction tactic that's having very real material consequences to a I think we are the smallest minority group in America, certainly one of the um and we're talking about, it's perfectly legal in half the country to kick somebody out of their home because they're trans.
Yeah,
It's perfectly legal in half the country to strip somebody of their job because they're trans. Half the country is trying very hard to make it to where we can't have legal ID documents that reflect who we live as. Our healthcare is hanging on by a thread right now. In fact, there's some states where trans people don't even really have access to healthcare at all anymore. Uh, and so it's a little of both. Say, leave them alone, stop using them as a distraction, comma, because this distraction is causing very real harm to these people. And uh, I mean, I myself here in my just in Bloomington, I've had to first of all, I mean, I've had to spend like dozens of hours of my time talking different trans people out of suicide attempts because they were facing, you know, uh, 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 anxiety levels that were so high that they couldn't think straight. And and I've had several trans women here in town who have had lapses in their insurance or what their insurance will cover, and they would end up in these gaps without their hormone medications. And I've had to break into my own backstash and hey, fine here, I'll I'll survive, I'll be fine. You need this more than I do right now, and I don't even have a very big stash at this moment, but if somebody like me doesn't need it as much as somebody who's actually facing like I'm going to inadvertently detransition because I can't
yeah,
maintain my medicine through my insurance now. I mean, this like real actual harm to people, and I've seen it, and uh, it it just is not a good time for our community, and
yeah,
you know, I don't I don't think people understand the pressure that the trans community is actually living under, and it's a lot.
yeah, I know there's just the social pressure, where folks have been have been afraid to be themselves, and that was really just starting to abate. I kind of think in the last 10 to 15 years maybe, until we get this backlash. And how does something as simple as because we were talking about documentation, right? Like an ID document. Um, some states, like you mentioned, adult trans folks are unable to get care in those hospitals. Like Indiana's not that bad yet. Like at least trans adults can still get care for now. But like I said, that option's not available to minors. That's where they start. Um, but what did get passed this year, it was an executive order by Mike Braun, was an executive order. Here it is. That states the Indiana executive branch must interpret sex and gender as synonymous under state law. So, in this context, both terms refer to an individual's immutable biological classification. So they say, right? Which fundamentally ignores that, I mean, there really are people who do not exist as male or female from birth, but they can't handle that. What is this actually? I think maybe a lot of folks don't understand what difficulty that can lead to just in your day to day life. If executive branch agencies like the Bureau of Motor Vehicles or like the state health department will not recognize you as you are, how does that percolate through all areas of your life?
Yeah. So, and real quick, just on the very idea that sex is an immutable thing anyway, if that were the case, then I really do wonder how I was able to grow a G cup. But, um, you know, um, it, so we've got a problem both on a state and federal level
Yeah.
where, um, trans people are being denied uh, uh, the ability to change their identification documents, whether it's birth certificates, state IDs, passports, um, to reflect our actual lived experiences, who we how both inside and out, how we navigate the world, and um and what we have access to is very wishy-washy anyway. We've sort of corrected on the passport thing. You can technically now go and change your gender marker on your passport, but if you do, they make you fill out a newly introduced form that says essentially, yeah, I'm trans and I'm changing the legal gender marker, which they do that. So now they have a separate, smaller registry that's easier to look through, so they know who the trans people are who have been doing this. Because I know that Florida and I believe Texas have also been
Hmm.
attempting to form state registries of trans people changing things on their IDs. Um, you know, there was a certain country back in the 1930s that made a registry of a minority group of people, and it didn't lead to a particularly good outcome. And I can't imagine that
No.
anything good would happen from forming a registry of a minority group here in America either.
And they started with the trans folks, right? I mean, they famously almost exterminated Europe's Jewish population, but they didn't start there. They started with the trans people.
Right.
Again, probably because
Yeah.
it's the smallest minority and maybe least understood, and therefore easiest to get away with. And then there the slippery slope begins, right?
Right. Yeah. Um, so and here in Indiana, of course, I mentioned earlier there was an attempt at legislation to take away our ability to change markers on our state IDs. That didn't go through yet, although there's always next year.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and you know, but in the interim, in the pursuit to comply with uh, Duke Braun's executive order, and I will not call him a governor because he's not a governor at all. Uh, the BMV is now taking in public feedback as part of their consideration to change their internal process, and uh, the result of this, if they make the change, and let's just be honest, while this can be fought, and it should be, and I certainly will be doing my best to get people to fight it, it's very likely to go through. Um,
Yeah.
it's once an agency that is beholden to the executive branch starts looking at changing their policies, they're almost certainly going to. It's very hard to change that course once it's started. But anyway, the result is going to be that even though it won't technically be state law, it'll be state policy that
Yeah.
BMV won't change your gender markers on your state IDs. And uh, I think a lot of cis
Yeah.
people don't really understand why this is a big deal. Um, and it can be a little bit difficult to explain because it's explaining a lot of little things most of the
Hmm.
time. But there are still certainly some bigger issues that can come about from this. One of the bigger things uh, that can arise from this, however uncommon it may be, is when you're dealing with police.
Yeah.
Um, and there is a 50, 60-year recorded history here in America of police from one end of the country to the other. They are dealing with a trans person, whether it's late at night and they're stopping you to talk to you. Why are you out on the sidewalk at 3 in the morning? Or, hey, you're going 10 over the speed limit, so we're pulling you over to talk to you, or whatever. Uh, and the standard procedure is show us your ID. And
Yeah.
there's a long recorded history of dealing with cops where they look at a trans person face to face and they look at the ID, and the trans person says, well, my name is whatever, and the ID says something different. And the trans person
Yeah.
looks distinctly different than they look in the ID. And the trans person says, well, I'm a woman, and the ID says male. And the cop just kind of defaults to siding with the ID, and they get hostile with trans people immediately. It's the trans community does not have a good history with police at all. We have long since made a point to circulate amongst ourselves. We don't want to deal with cops ever because we have never had a good history with them at all. Um, you know, and what happens if the cop decides for whatever reason to arrest a trans person?
Hmm.
Well, what does the ID say? Does the ID
Yeah.
say male? Well, then you're going to be housed on the male end of the jail, or God forbid, you know, you have a trial and things escalate and you end up in prison. They house you in the men's prison. And we have statistical data on this that shows that trans women who are housed in the male end of jails and prisons are something like 9 or 10 times more likely to face sexual assault, both from other inmates and from warden staff. And that's all a result of having a simple legal document that says you're a male because you just didn't have the access to get it changed. And it's kind of an obtuse process, even when a state allows it anyway.
Right.
It,
And up until now we have, right?
so
From when did we put that in? What was it, like 2020? No, it wouldn't have been 2012. Pence would have been around. But the the Indiana Bureau of Motor Vehicles, at least for the last several years, has allowed folks to change the gender marker on their driver's license or get an X marker uh, for like non-binary or neither male or female, right?
Mhm.
And this executive order would eliminate
Mhm.
the ability to change gender and would eliminate the availability to have an X marker. And furthermore, it's not like you're grandfathered in when you have to renew your license. They're gonna make you change it back too. And I think
Yeah,
that's
if they can
maybe
if
the
they can dig up,
worst of it. Yeah.
yeah, if they can dig up a history, they'll look up your birth certificate or your social security or whatever, and if they can find anything that indicates, uh, you know, male or female with in opposition to whatever you identify as trans, man,
Yeah.
woman, then yeah, they'll force a change on you that you didn't want. Um, and and even not just dealing with like cops and prisons, you have there's thousands of different ways that we navigate every day socially in which
Yeah.
having an ID that does not correctly correspond to who you are and how you live can still be detrimental. It's just part of our general culture. You go somewhere, like you go to a bank, you need to access your bank account, they need to see your ID.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody looks at it and they see the mail marker and okay, hi sir. And you know that even happened to me prior to my getting all of my different documents changed years ago. It literally in the week of my getting my court order to start it all. I went to the bank 2 days before I had to go to court, and teller looked at my ID. Okay, hi sir. Even though I already since been on
Yeah.
hormones and wearing feminine clothing and all this, just oh, okay, hi sir. And then the next week go back to the bank, look at the new ID. Oh, hi ma'am. Because it's just kind of a general part of our culture where a lot of
Yeah.
us don't even think about things. We just default to like an autopilot. And you know
Yeah. Oh, like I was raised to say sir and ma'am, and you just you do it. You see the M,
yeah.
yeah.
And
I'd like to think that we've learned context a little bit better than that, but yeah, some
we
folks still.
haven't though. and
Yeah.
and i and I still deal with some of that just at my day job. And but um but when you are a trans person, this is just sort of a constant thing. Every day you go out into the world and people refer to you in these incorrect ways, and it does actually add up. A lot of cis people don't really understand, but it's the death by a thousand cuts idea.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
And
microaggressions. We talked about this like a couple of years ago, like after George Floyd. Like people really, I think, began to understood the concept of microaggressions, but boy, I think we kind of quit talking about it, and we certainly didn't extend that to everybody, right?
right. um but all of this is to say is there's just many different situations in which the something as simple as an ID of some kind that for somebody like me who lives as a woman, and I've got three different doctors that have signed forms that say I'm female. you know uh just having an ID document where people look at and go, oh, okay, hi ma'am, saves me more trouble and more stress than people understand how to qualify or quantify. And and it's pretty much the same for any trans person in America and any trans person in Indiana. just giving us access to that one thing is actually a huge material good for us. Um, and that's why it's actually very dire that we're facing this problem where both the federal government and the state government are trying so hard to take that from us. And this is leading me to what's become my pet project uh,
Yeah, I
here.
wanted to ask about this because before we get to it, I just want to like lay a little groundwork. There's states now. All right, we're talking about Indiana, slippery slope. Yeah, executive order here, or maybe starts in the BMV. There's states like Texas are attempting to make uh, make it a crime to attempt to change your identification to match your actual gender expression, and they're calling it fraud. I mean, they're literally trying to criminalize your existence. So that's why, in these MAGA captured jurisdictions where they're hostile to science and, people's actual lived experience, there are cities that are doing things to fight back, to affirm your existence and to um, reflect that on legal documentation. And you're trying to do something like that here in Bloomington.
Yeah, by the legal structure in America, cities are allowed, if they so choose, to implement their own municipal ID programs. And municipal IDs are they're very limited in their range, very limited in their scope, where they're valid, they can do, but they also typically have fewer requirements, fewer roadblocks to getting one compared to a state ID or a
Yeah.
federal ID. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. They're even though they're only really valid in the city that grants them, it's easier to get one most of the time, and they're also usually more flexible. From my research, I don't know about all, but certainly many of the cities that have implemented these programs typically make it pretty easy to put whatever gender marker you want or none on your city ID. And this is something that I've been working on here in Bloomington. Uh, that the Bloomington Human Rights Commission has been. We've been researching it, discussing it. Uh, you know, whether or not we want to formally propose and recommend this to the mayor's office. I'm not going to be dishonest here. Uh, uh, my driving force here is that this is something that we can do to help my immediate community and demographic. But just because I want to help trans people doesn't mean that this also can't help other demographics. This actually does potentially aid numerous demographics in the city, assuming that anybody wants one. So, anybody who is from a demographic that may often face hurdles to getting IDs renewed or getting new IDs when they lose them. You have like the unhoused population, you have people with
Yeah.
criminal backgrounds, you have immigrant communities, even youth communities. These are all different people who will very often have barriers to getting a state ID, and they can also benefit from a municipal ID if they so chose.
I understand a lot of localities they may have started these programs so that undocumented people have some form of identification that they can have.
Yeah, my understanding is that South Bend primarily geared this toward their undocumented uh, population. And if you're just speaking by raw numbers, I think that your immigrant population in any city is probably the largest overall demographic that could benefit from municipal IDs. There's a bit of an issue with that, uh, especially in this current climate we're
Yeah.
living in.
Yeah.
A lot of people in different immigrant communities want as little attention on them as possible.
Yeah.
They want as you know thin of a paper trail as possible. They're trying very hard to be invisible, and I don't blame them at all.
For sure.
I do understand their fear. It's a very real fear. So unfortunately, um, so far it doesn't really look like we're going to be getting very much support from that community or from other commissions that represent those communities. Um, and That is unfortunate. But I think just because that broader demographic may not be interested in a program like this right now doesn't mean that we shouldn't still pursue it, um, because there is still good that can be done with a program like this.
Right, I've seen, like, in other towns like Chicago, they have these and they use them as, it's also a library card and your, like, public transportation pass, you can, reload and that, and, so they have more uses. It's, like, not just a feel-good thing for
Right,
folks who are living on the margins, like, these things have practical purposes for the entire community, not just a handful of people.
right. It is a legal identification document, um, and it may not be valid outside of the city, technically speaking, but it is a legal ID. And as you said, if you can show it to a cop, and they'll accept it within the
Mhm.
city limits. You can generally banks in these cities accept them. They typically, I don't know about always, but typically they do double up as library cards, bus
Mhm.
passes. I know that one or two cities, I believe they'll let them double as some kind of a pay card or something. It is a little difficult to retain the info for every specific city.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot you can do with it, is the
But
point,
yeah,
and yeah,
they're very practically useful things. Not everybody that I've approached or broadcast this to has been uh, receptive to it, and I think a lot of people just kind of misunderstand
yeah,
when I'm describing. I think the way you just phrased it is good. I think some people misinterpret this as, oh, it's a feel good thing. And I'm trying to explain, yeah, it is a feel good thing that is also practically useful in a lot of different situations, which is why we should be pursuing this. Uh, and that's why this has become a pet project of mine here in Bloomington.
yeah. What's the biggest pushback you get? Is it something like, "Oh, well, how are we gonna pay for it? What's it gonna cost?"
Yes, that's probably been the second biggest thing beyond. I think the first biggest pushback is just things that I've been told of. Well, it doesn't really look like the immigrant community in Bloomington really wants to support this right now because they're very afraid that if a cop pulls them over and sees a city ID, then they'll just assume undocumented or illegal resident, and they'll be kicked out of the city. Uh, which is understandable, as I said.
Right.
But yeah, the how are we going to pay for it thing uh, is the second biggest thing that I've seen so far. And my immediate answer to that is, well, we don't have the program up and running, and we haven't even been able to talk about specifics of how to logistically implement it yet because we just haven't gotten that far internally. So I don't know. I don't know that answer yet, and that's just the honest answer. Now I can say it likely would not be handled by the city itself. Uh, there is a third party a company that is responsible for this in South Bend.
Hmm.
Uh, the company is called La Casa de Amistad. And if I remember correctly, I believe that it was them as a company who approached South Bend uh, initially, and they're the ones who actually handle the logistics of the ID. And so it takes the financial burden off the city of South Bend and puts it on this company. Uh, I think as a result of that, it's a little more expensive. Uh, it's something like 25 or $30 for a South Bend City ID,
Oh my.
and uh, yeah, it's a little bit pricier compared to state IDs. But I don't remember right now, but 10 or 15 maybe. Not typically that expensive, but this is where you're kind of comparing. Uh, yeah, it's a little bit more expensive, but does it still have practical uses? Yes.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, does it take off financial burden from the city so that the city is not having to redirect resources and money from other important things? Yes. And is it giving certain communities that may not have access to something like this an ID that's valid and useful and also properly represents their personhood? Yes. So in exchange for those things, honestly, I feel like 25 or $30 is actually pretty reasonable. Am I going to have to give up a pack of cigarettes? You know, Fine. I think it's if that is in fact how it would be in Bloomington, which we don't know for certain, but if that is, I actually believe that that's a perfectly fair trade. And I would absolutely sign up for one myself.
Yeah. So it sounds like we're still a little ways away from getting something like that here. We have to get to the point where the city would want to pursue it and then, do a study and figure out how the logistics would work and how much it would have to cost and all that. So we're a little bit of ways from that, it sounds like. So, well, what can residents here in Bloomington and Monroe County do if they think this is also a good idea and something we should pursue?
Um, the most immediate thing is, I would say, show up to your local commission meetings because these are open to the public and they're recorded. So it's all public record, and we do take public input on both things that we talk about in the meetings themselves, but also if members of the public just have any input on anything that is related to that commission, we would absolutely love to hear it from you. Um, and uh, if somebody wants to look up the Bloomington Monroe County Human Rights Commission on the city website, the meeting agendas and meeting minutes are logged, fully accessible. We started discussing the City ID program in I know February. I think it may have started in January. It's it's been a heck of a decade this year.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, it has. Yes.
but if somebody wants to go through those uh, archive, they're not hard to find, and it's public knowledge. It's right there. So if you want to look up the log of what we've talked about so far, you've got that. And if you want to support this at all, by all means, please show up, sit in on the commission meeting. It's not going to be exciting. These meetings are relatively boring, but they do serve a purpose. And when we get to the public input section, we'd love to hear from anybody. And you know what? I'm a fair-minded person. If you don't like the idea of a program like this and you want to make a case for that too, I will happily listen. This program idea might be my baby, but I will listen if you want to make a case for why you don't think it's a good idea. Um, let's do both, you know. And but that's the most immediate thing is show up to your commission meetings. We're likely to be talking about this for the next 2 or 3 meetings. I don't think that there is any harm in emailing the mayor's office if you genuinely feel like you believe in this program. In fact, it could even help. You know, a handful of emails could show some public support.
Yeah,
Uh,
and you got your county commissioners too. Your county elected officials would also probably be a good place to direct your thoughts on this also because this is a Bloomington/Monroe County Human Rights Commission, right?
um, no, actually, well, the commission works for both the city and the county, but the
Yeah.
ID itself would only be for the city.
Okay.
It is actually, interestingly enough, illegal for counties to have an ID.
Oh,
Uh, and I'm not entirely sure why the laws are written like that. Cities can have an ID program, a county cannot. That's that's just how American law is structured.
okay. Excellent. Fantastic. So, what did we miss here today, Liliana? Did we cover everything you wanted to talk about? Is there anything you wanted to make sure we get in here before we got to run?
I guess I'll just close this out by saying to all of my cisgender cousins in Bloomington, maybe take 5 minutes out of your day if you could, and think a little more about what your trans neighbors are dealing with right now. As you probably have an idea, but you need to take that idea and magnify it because it's probably a lot worse than what you're imagining. So
And y'all been on the front lines too long. It's time for folks that look like me to get out there and be in front of these things so y'all don't have to keep putting yourselves in danger.
let's do it together. Let's both of us
Hey,
get out there.
there you go. I love it. All right. Well, that's a good place to leave this. Liliana Young, I thank you so much for joining me here on the Who's Lit podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
You're listening to my conversation with Liliana Young, Secretary of the Bloomington Monroe County Human Rights Commission and founder of the Sisterhood of Bloomington. We originally spoke in July. Liliana rejoined me earlier this week to provide a few updates. Liliana Young, welcome back.
Hello again.
So since we've spoken last, there have been some updates with regards to the situation in Indiana as far as trans folks and their legal documents and some other things. And you wanted to provide an update for me, and I'd really like to hear about it.
Yeah, we talked about at the time what was the pending public hearing about the BMV's policy
Yeah.
change to comply with our illustrious governor's executive order about how Indiana views gender.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
that hearing has since happened. And um, interesting experience, and interesting in a positive light. Um,
Were you able to make it up there?
yeah, yeah. I took the day off of work. I swapped my schedule around with fellow employees. I wasn't gonna miss my chance to go scream at the state government.
Yeah, for sure, especially when they deserve it. Well, no, so that's good. So this is a first-hand account. Yeah, so tell me more about that day.
Mhm. So the hearing was scheduled for an hour, and it went on for almost three. Um, the the conference hall that they designated for it was completely filled. In fact, there were so many people there that they had to bring in extra chairs uh, for running out of space at the tables that they had initially set up.
Oh, okay.
And not a single person spoke in favor of the policy change. It was 3 hours of uh, people from all across the state. And people were showing up from Evansville. People were showing up from, I think, Elkhart
Yeah.
and the various corners of the state. And it wasn't just trans people. There were cis people there too. In fact, it was actually, I think, mostly cis people who were showing up to yell at the government and tell them to shut up and back off, which was interesting to me. Um, at the hearings that I've been to for like bills or something, if it concerns trans people, most of the time it's mostly trans people showing up to defend themselves. But this time, the non-trans community really showed up, and I appreciate that. That was really great. And just a shout out to all of the Hoosiers from across the state who took the time to come here, because I'm used to it, people from in Indy or near Indy, like
Yeah.
Bloomington, maybe the liberals showing, but everyone. I think there was even a couple of conservative people or people who seemed more conservative, but they still showed up to be like, "Yo, this is overreach. This is stupid." and
Yeah.
so I really appreciate that. Actually, made me feel pretty good about being a Hoosier. And
It's good to see allies getting out there. That is super important, especially right now.
mhm,
Um, those who can speak up need to.
yeah, yeah. So that was great. In fact, the hearing went on for so long that the live stream that the state set up cut
Yeah.
off at an hour because that's the only time that they had
Mhm.
designated for it. Uh, so the official recording is, unfortunately, I don't think it's complete. If you can even find it, I looked across 4 different state websites and I can't find the damn thing. But uh,
That's kind of concerning in a way that it's not something you can fire right back up easily. That's a whole, couple hours of government business that went undocumented.
yeah, which is really unfortunate, but that feels kind of like par for the course in Indiana. Archives of public hearings don't seem to be always complete or accessible, if you can even,
Y-
because everything's spread out.
Yeah, that's incredibly concerning.
Yeah. But overall, very positive experience. And
Did they make any decisions that day?
no, the order, the process order is it goes to public hearing, and then it gets. I think the heads of the BMV have to consider it, and then they kick it up to the attorney general, and then he kicks it up to the governor, and they all weigh in. And is it going to
And,
be changed?
and
Well,
and those guys already have their minds made up. Um, so really,
there's
it
there's a
depends on.
99% chance that it's going to be changed, but they have to change it knowing with documented proof that nobody showed up who was in favor of it, that Hoosiers from the entire state don't want this, that it's not just trans people who don't want this.
So, what's the next step there? Is this going to be sometime soon when this happens, or you still sort of in limbo right now?
That's up to Todd Rokita and Mike Braun right now. Those two very fine, upstanding gentlemen. already have their minds made up. I'm sure uh, they're quite openly hostile to my community. But you know, every now and then, when planets align and fairies get their wings, Republicans will surprise you by actually doing something decent. It's not particularly common in my experience, but they do on occasion seem to grow a conscience and then lose it. But, so we'll find out. Now, my understanding was that the time frame was that the policy change would take effect in October if it changes. So we've still got about 6, 7 weeks.
So in that time, fill me in, folks can still get their ID with whatever gender marker they feel is appropriate
Right, for now.
for now.
Um,
Okay.
uh, yeah, if you are if you're a trans person and if you have your court orders for your name and gender marker changes, you've still got time. I recommend moving it because your time is for now probably running out, unfortunately. But it's not a done deal yet. Unfortunately, birth certificates are another story. Uh,
Yeah, tell me about this. This is another place where we're kind of counting on Todd Rokita to grow a conscience, huh?
yeah, the most illustrious and upstanding Attorney General in the Union, Mr. Todd Rokita, absolutely love him, uh, has decided to declare that changing genders on birth certificates is fraudulent and falsifying records, and has been personally intervening in cases of uh, people using court orders to amend their birth certificates. I don't know, kind of strikes me as a bit of government overreach, which I thought Republicans didn't like, but
Yeah, well, yeah, man. Like, doesn't he, it, whatever you think of the policy, doesn't Rokita himself have something better to do? Like, he is the attorney general of the entire state.
my guess, I would say maybe he's trying to distract people while he's continuing to be under a disciplinary review. Who am I to judge? I'm
I
not
honestly
perfect.
wish it was that. You know, I think he actually takes the glee in picking on people that are, in more precarious situations than him. I think he enjoys it. I think he likes being a bully, and it is gross. And that is not why anybody should get into politics.
I'm inclined to agree. All sarcasm aside, it's bullying, but it's bullying with the weight of a state government to back you, which makes it fascism, really.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it,
Fascism is it's bullying with yeah, the full weight of government behind you.
I don't know, in the list of priorities in running a state, I really fail to see. And I know that I'm biased because I'm trans, but I fail to see how this benefits Hoosiers. It there's so many other things. We've got so many issues going on in this state. I don't birth certificates are your priority? My dude, come
Yeah,
on.
yeah. I mean, this guy is, well, the things he could be looking into, the gross negligence, um, pollution, fraud that goes on amongst his campaign donors is a far more serious offense than, my God, a trans person existing as they are, and yet, yeah, I mean, he can't go after the real criminals in the state because the call's coming from inside the house. Well, gee, I hate that the news is not great in that regard. Any good updates?
Yeah, to a degree, sure. So we talked a little last time about municipal IDs and how I've been
Yeah.
working with the Bloomington Human Rights Commission, and we've we've recently finished a session of research and speaking with the people running municipal IDs out of Goshen and Elkhart
Mm.
and Plymouth, and we've learned a lot about how their uh, programs are implemented, and
And if I
we're
may, just for a second, these are like, Elkhart and Goshen and Plymouth are not exactly like bastions of liberalism as you'd think of them.
right. I mean, really, once you get out of Bloomington, no city is as liberal as Bloomington. Even in places that have a significant, left leaning presence of some degree, nowhere is as left leaning as Bloomington. So, that these programs exist at all, and these programs, they weren't created for trans people, but trans people can benefit from them for sure.
Yeah.
In Plymouth, Goshen, and Elkhart, their municipal IDs don't even have gender markers at all. It's not a part of the information that they record. So it's just a name and a photo. So whatever name you live by, I've spoken with these program managers, and they told me, as long as you have like something that can identify you, like if you're a trans person and you have a new chosen name, as long as you have something that identifies you by that name, doesn't have to be an ID necessarily, can be male or whatever,
Yeah.
then they'll put that on your ID, and because you have proof that that's your name, and so then you have a name and a photo. So if even removing a gender marker, if I had a Goshen municipal ID, you would say Lilliana, and it would have my photo. And for all you knew, you look at that and it's, well, Liliana's a very feminine name, and this is a very feminine looking person, so I guess this is a woman. So this is how trans people can benefit from these in those cities. Uh, in my understanding from my conversations with those uh, ID managers is they've been in contact with people out of Fort Wayne. I think the city council, if I remember, of Fort Wayne has been in communication with them, and they've handed
Hmm.
off the blueprint structure of their municipal IDs to Fort Wayne. So Fort Wayne is now apparently considering. I don't know how far into the process they are, but they're at least researching it, which is
Yeah.
promising. And here in Bloomington, we've done a lot of research within our commission, and we are starting to form up some more formalized outlines and proposals, and we're looking for groups to partner with within the city. In summary, the way that these programs are run in the other cities is it's not the city governments that run these. It's a public private partnership, and uh, the private groups are the ones handling the costs, and they're the ones handing out the IDs. It's just that they are recognized by the city as a local ID, and uh, in some cases, these groups will even waive the fee if
Oh,
if you
nice.
are like a low income person, because the standard price is 25 for these city IDs, which is higher than a state ID. But if
Right, but
you're
not by a whole lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but if you're a low income person, they have options for fee waiving for the most part. eating the cost of a handful of IDs doesn't seem to hurt them at all. Um, and as far as like data storage and all goes, they take your data, your statistics for the ID, and then they print out the ID, and then they delete the data you just gave them. So there's not even anything stored
Hmm.
in these groups. Whereas if it were a government overseen program, the city would have to store all of the statistics, which would then make it potentially subject to something like federal or state subpoenas or whatever if they wanted to. But since these are private groups running it, they can do whatever they want. What they have so far done is they take your data and then they delete it, uh, which I actually think is great.
Yeah, for data privacy folks, that's very encouraging. Well, hey, I guess that's a little bit of good news to end on that things are still moving along there, and I didn't know we had programs like that already in existence in the state, so I'll learn something new.
It's important, I think, for everybody to remember that even when you have this seemingly crushing weight of bad news from federal or state governments, it is very often city and county policy that can do just enough to lift some of that weight off of your shoulders and make things more manageable. So we all need to remember not to despair too much.
All right, well, Liliana, thanks so much for the update. I really appreciate you coming back and filling us in,
Yeah, thanks for calling me back in. Love to be back any other time.
and we'll be glad to have you. Thanks so much. Once again, that was Liliana Young, Secretary of the Bloomington Monroe County Human Rights Commission and founder of the solidarity group, the Sisterhood of Bloomington. Democrats, do not be tempted to listen to the Seth Moultons, Tom Swazzies, and Gavin Newsoms of the party. Defending the trans community is not a liability, but a strength. Demonstrating a willingness to throw one group overboard is hardly reassuring to the next vulnerable group. Will you abandon them next, depending on which way the wind blows? We must stand 10 toes down for human rights and dignity for all. That's it for now, but I'll be back this weekend on Project Next Media Network's YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch streams where I host Who's Left This Week, Indiana's most thorough Sunday morning news and politics talk show. Come check that out live if you get a chance. It's a lot of fun if you can call following the news in this timeline fun. But I bring together a diverse group of panelists from the Democratic Socialist left to never Trump conservatives, and we look at the week's headlines from around Indiana and beyond. We also take time to examine one big thing, a different deep dive every week. I hope to see you there in the comments, but if you can't make it live, the program will be available as a podcast Sunday afternoon. Thanks again to Liliana Young for her time and for her service to the community. It takes a lot of courage for her to put herself in a public-facing position in these difficult times. The least that those of us with cisgender privilege can do is lend our support. Finally, I'll ask one last time for a little financial support from you at whosleft.us, where you'll find everything I've ever published, and you can help with a paid subscription. I rely solely on the generosity of kind patrons like you to make this information available for free to everybody. In addition to the website, you can also find me on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at Who's Left, or on most other social media sites at ScottROG78, where you can hit me up with feedback, tips, ideas, and concerns. Finally, please forward the show to a friend and have them pass it on. Let's keep building this project and a truly democratic state, one conversation at a time. Until the next one, this has been the Who's Left podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.